Hey everyone, welcome to the Warrior Kings podcast where we cover mindset, masculinity, and marriage. Today I have a very special guest. His name is Alex Pardi, and he is the guy you need to call if you're about to have a divorce. When your relationship is on the rocks, being threatened with divorce, this guy specializes in saving marriages and preventing divorce. We go back and forth on conflict resolution. I learn a lot from him. He learned some stuff from me too, and we are now actually working on a joint little offer together. So things are exciting for the future because we realize both of us are helping men just at different stages. For conflict resolution, learning how to speak to your spouse in a way that both of you can understand, help prevent arguments, etc. Let's get into it.
It's fun to be connecting with you on marriages and relationships and all that kind of stuff. It's really cool to be connecting with someone else in the space. So thanks for thinking of this and for getting on with me.
Oh yeah, 100%. And you as well. And I was telling you yesterday, I have great respect for what you do, especially because you're the clutch player when the marriage needs it. like, like you're the MJ in the last 30 seconds and they're down by 2.
Yeah, I was just thinking about how to put it, and one of the things that came to mind is that the night is always darkest before dawn. And that also works in relationships, and so things can seem darkest right before they get better. And I'm the guy that leads you through dawn, and you're the guy, it sounds like, that leads people through the day.
Yeah, I think so. Make sure you don't get lost and starve in the desert. It's kind of
Exactly.
the main thing. Awesome. Well, once again, glad to have you here, and I'm also happy that you're willing to connect. Because people in even just neighboring niches sometimes don't want anything to do with anyone else in that space.
Yeah.
So I think it's awesome that you're willing to come on. And after talking with you yesterday, I have a lot more. Like, I had respect for you, and then I learned what you did, and I was like, holy cow, this guy's on a different level. So the things you do are really awesome.
Thank you.
What I wanted to get into, and I saved this specifically for today, was kind of your origin story and like where you came from, and then how, kind of take me through the path of how you got to this where you are now.
Yeah, it's sort of a meandering path. I didn't set out thinking I'm going to help guys who are in a rocky place with their wives to prevent divorce. I actually got into this because a few years ago I was bedridden at one point with an illness, and in that whole process of getting better, for the first time in my life, this was during university, for the first time in my life, I actually started to ask myself, what is it that I wanted to do with my life? And, because I'd been on that whole like school rat race where it's like, you go through high school, just to get into college.
Yeah.
And then you start college and you don't even think of where it is that you want to go. You just get your major, do internships, and go, right? But that time of getting better actually gave me the time to think about what I wanted to do. And one of the big problems that I saw out there was that people don't really know how to communicate well. And I saw this mainly with students going into the workforce out of college. Students today are so used to study guides. They're used to being tested on prescriptive things and having their knowledge tested on like what's in the box, what's in the realm of what's been taught.
Okay.
Whereas when you get beyond beyond university and the workplace, you need to be much more creative.
Okay.
And so I ended up not going down that route because students right out of college tend to not have that much money. So, but what I found is that the same principles and skill set applied to people who were in conflict situations.
Okay.
Most people aren't taught how to defuse conflict, how to disarm someone's resentment towards you.
Okay.
They're not taught how to approach a conflict. They're not taught how to listen. Like, these are all interpersonal skills that are hugely studied now. right? And for probably the first time in history to this level.
Yeah.
But nobody's actually learning it. And so having then started to help people through conflict and prevent breakups of different kinds, prevent a divorce, I realized that a few things kind of clicked into place. One was that there are certain people who are much more coachable and therefore much better at just like learning skills on the fly and implementing them to be able to achieve an outcome. And typically the people with that kind of mindset are entrepreneurs who need to learn all the skills they need to do to master business, sales, the psychology of sales, the psychology of marketing, all that kind of stuff. And the other component to that was that the people who achieve the best results tend to be the ones who have the biggest problem that's looming right in their face, that are also that they also like have no alternative. Like they are totally unwilling to accept the alternative of breakup or of divorce.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I got into it. It also really satisfies the fact that my parents got divorced a few years ago. So there's that component as well, where I feel like I'm kind of saving the thing I couldn't save, right?
Yeah.
So we can go into that as well. But that's kind of the origin story. Like I said, it was very meandering, but that's how I wound up on this path.
For conflict resolution.
Yeah.
So just to touch back, when you were in university, you noticed this problem originally, and then you were thinking, oh, I can help these guys, but no one here has money, so this is obviously like isn't something I can do like full time because you need money to live.
Right.
That was when you initially had the idea.
Yeah. Technically while I was away from university, getting better from this illness that I had.
Do you know the specific time, or like was there a specific moment where it clicked, when it was just like, you know what, a lot of these people in school just don't have the skill down?
Yeah. I read a book on there's literature out there on what the missing skill sets are from people who are entering the workforce.
Okay.
So that was the original group of people that I wanted to help.
Okay. Do you know the name of the book, or you care to share? Or?
I can't find it right now.
All good. That happens to me sometimes. It's like I know exactly what it's called, or like what all of it's about, but I just don't know the title.
Yeah.
I think you might, maybe it's because you're like, so personally, there's a lot of things that I don't know the origin of, because as I'm reading information, I'm only assimilating what I could be using in my life. I don't know if you're the same way. So like, for example, biology is something I was never good at, because it's like, I don't need to know the 7 names of a cat. Like that,
right.
What's that pertinent to what I'm doing in life? Or there's other stuff where it's like, I learned, for example, visualization, and I know the name of the book just because I read it a bunch of times, but I don't know the science of like in your mind, brain anatomy of like what's going on when you're visualizing, but I just know visualization application is effective. And so
Right.
It's kind of like that. Or I don't know what the name of the thing is called. I just know it works. At least it works in my life. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that book that you learned about visualization? That sounds great.
The first one was Thinking Body, Dancing Mind. It's a book written specifically for athletes and for they did it for business, but I read it when I was like 16, and so that business part I kind of just glanced over. But it was specifically for athletes, and it taught a really Eastern way of thinking about sports, which I thought aligned more logically than Western style. So I resonated with that a little bit more.
Oh, cool. What was the, can you give me the punchline of it? Like what?
Well, so overall, I guess the difference between Eastern and Western philosophies is like Eastern is you're focused on constant progress regardless of outcome, and then Western is like win at all costs, like Talladega Nights, if you're not first, you're last kind of mentality. I don't know if have you watched that or
Gotcha. No.
It's like a real. You're gonna lose some brain cells if you watch it, but it's hilarious to watch. It's about a NASCAR driver, and essentially his whole life goal is like if you're not the first, you're last, and so it's his whole comedic struggle of trying to deal with that. But yeah, there's it gave a kind of a difference between those two, and I aligned more so with the progress side of things, like constant progress over time, and like if you think about a masterpiece painting, it's done by a bunch of small details done well.
Right.
So if you focus on the small details and the progress, the byproduct is you win. And then the visualization part was essentially like if you were to, this is kind of a, like my previous expertise was like Taekwondo and all this athlete stuff. And so one of the big things that got me in the book was like your mind doesn't distinguish between what's in the mind and what's real, like what you perceive to be real in the external world. So if you were to imagine taking a lemon wedge and like biting into it, and then all the lemon juice going around your gums and your tongue, like you salivate as if you're actually doing it. It's because your mind can't tell the difference between the two. And so the essential part of the book is if you visualize the parts of your sport or game that you need to go well, or you visualize, for example, let's say you have a hard time when a ref makes a bad call and you just get super pissed. But you can't do that because now the ref doesn't like you. And then you're also off emotional balance. So it's like you don't play as good. If you visualize a call going badly and then you're responding well, then you're like rewiring the circuits in your brain to see when a call doesn't go well, this is what to do. And so instead of having to wait for a game to do that, you can rehearse that 50, 100, 150 times in your brain. And that way it's like rewired faster.
That's awesome.
And then you can do that with techniques also, like if I'm practicing kicking someone in the face with my front leg. The first time I landed actually was after visualizing a bunch of times. I didn't really practice it that much in training. And then the guy came in and bam, it just came up. I got him. And I was like, oh, it works.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. Thanks. That's what I was doing before all this stuff.
Yeah, that reminds me also of Michael Jordan, right?
Yeah.
Or Kobe. I can't remember if it was Michael Jordan or Kobe. They would say that they threw the most free throws in their own minds.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably similar concept.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, if you're always imagining the game, then your brain's rehearsing what to do like all the time. So.
Right.
Anyway, that was that book.
Cool.
But I know you were ill in university. Did you, before that, just out of curiosity, did you do sports also? Like you seem like a pretty fit guy.
I played soccer growing up.
Which position?
Striker or left wing.
I played sweeper.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, I played 2 years, but not as cool as striker.
not as much glory.
Yeah, I saved the goal.
Yeah.
Just joking.
I played soccer. I used to sail a lot as well.
Oh,
sailing's a lot of fun.
With the whole, right? I don't know what the terms are called, but essentially, were you on a team or was it just you doing the boat by yourself?
No, it was usually 2-man dinghies.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot. It's very skill based, but it's also very kind of intellectual in the sense that you really need to always be observing the wind. You need to know where your target is, but the wind conditions change. You need to know kind of what you're doing.
Okay.
It's fun. It's really fun.
It does. I've been sailing one time with my boss, and he, or with my former boss, and he just told me literally what to do because I was like, I don't know what to do. So we would be like out there. He's like, okay, we're gonna switch, and as soon as you grab the wheel, you need to turn as hard to left as you can until it goes, and hold it there. And I was like, okay. So that's my extent of sailing, but it was a lot of fun, and I was like, because there's two of you, are you guys racing? Was that it, or are you guys just?
Yeah. So we do regattas, and we'd race against other dinghies.
What's it?
Other boats.
Can you just?
A dinghy is basically, a dinghy is basically. It sounds not that glamorous, but it's basically the word for a small, non-motorized boat.
Is that the one where it's like there's almost like two little rafts and a net in the middle, and there's a sail, and you guys are like half sideways sometimes in the wind?
No, that's a catamaran.
Okay, that's different. Sorry.
A catamaran. Yeah, no, it's fine. A catamaran has two hulls.
Okay.
Two hulls. I would only sail on monohull dinghies.
Okay.
So, and specifically, I'd sail on something called a skiff. So, a skiff is short for sailing, keeping it flat and fast. So, in the past, you used to see these very old archaic boats. They always used to be on a slant, or like the catamaran that you were talking about, or one hull is out of the water. These boats, they go their fastest when they're completely flat.
Okay.
And what they basically do is once they reach a certain speed, the wake, they actually ride their own wake. So they're sped up by their own wake.
Whoa.
The physics are very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I don't know how we got on to sailing.
I don't know either, actually, but that was pretty cool that was interesting to learn about. Okay, so let's go back to where we were at. You wanted to help men in conflict resolution because there are a lot of interpersonal skills that people just don't leave university with, and it's not even taught, which I would agree with, actually, because a lot of that stuff isn't taught. I learned public speaking with no conflict resolution, which I think would probably be I'm going to use conflict resolution a lot more than I'm going to use public speaking. Like, I've given, I think, exactly one presentation in my few years of working, and I've had to resolve a lot of conflicts, and luckily I learned a little bit about it before I got in there, but there's some people who don't.
Yeah.
So on that note, like, you mentioned your parents' divorce, and you mentioned to me the other day that happened a few years ago, or really recently, or
it happened in adulthood. So it happened, it started a few years ago and finished up a couple years ago.
Okay.
The interesting thing about that was that I was kind of already learning the skills that I'm now applying in my business while I was growing up, because my parents, the writing was on the wall for their divorce way before there was a lot of conflict in the house. And when I would kind of get involved and be like, look, mom, dad means this, and look, dad, mom means this, they'd be like, oh. And then that fight would kind of be resolved. But when I left for college, things kind of went downhill.
You weren't there to mediate it anymore.
Right. But I always had this I guess, propensity to being able to understand differing viewpoints, differing opinions without necessarily agreeing with them. And that's kind of what gets into the art of what I do with my clients. Is I teach them to show understanding of a point of view without agreeing with a point of view.
That's really good.
That's much harder than people think. It becomes a bit of an art, a bit of a game, actually, if you try to keep it kind of lighthearted for yourself. Not that conflict is a game or that it's fun at all, but if you pose it as that challenge, then it can be easier to kind of get there.
Okay. So teach understanding without agreeing. Just because I'm like really curious about that. What's an example of how you would execute that? Because there's times where I think I do that, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, essentially what you're doing to show that you understand someone's point of view without agreeing, they basically need to have some kind of confirmation on your part that you've understood, right? And the only way that you can do that is by repeating back to them what they've said to you, but in your own words.
Okay.
And the other component that comes in with that is making sure that you're accurately labeling their emotions.
Okay. That makes sense. So essentially it'd be between the two, in my experience, I think generally labeling the emotion would come first, and then you surmise their. Well, actually, let me think about that. In a situation where I don't agree, I think my standard operating procedure, my SOP, would be to label their emotion until I feel like the emotion has been fully validated, I guess, and then after that, then I'll try and surmise their point back to them. Or summarize their point back to them. And then that's, I think, then at least they feel not only emotionally understood, but logically understood. And then if I still give let's say I need to give a suggestion, because a lot of times people are talking and they don't want suggestions, but in case I do need to give a suggestion because it's work or whatever, then I'd give a suggestion. And I think they're more receptive to receiving it, because it's like they fully understand my point and they still believe this is kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's more or less the framework. I think when it comes to, when you're at work with someone and there's kind of something going on there, the stakes typically aren't as high.
Oh yeah.
As when
deadline's Tuesday versus Wednesday versus half my stuff.
Right. So like in an example of, a married couple who need to see things, who need to resolve, who need to talk things out. That process can be hours long sometimes.
Okay.
I've personally had to either sit there and really actively listen with my partner. I've also had to do this with, I've even had to do this with clients who had such an emotional buildup that they needed to vent out before they were actually be receptive to techniques.
Yeah.
So this one time, I remember I actually had to sit there, label, repeat back what was being said, label again, repeat back, and do that whole process. It took me like 3 hours.
Holy cow.
But, most people wouldn't go through a kind of exploratory session. Most, how do I put it? Most people who work with others wouldn't take that kind of time.
Yeah, because that's a lot of time.
as soon as I did that, as soon as there was nothing else to clear out, right? That person was able to assimilate everything I could teach in 45 minutes to an hour, and then implement it immediately, because they had no emotional barrier preventing them from absorbing and from being willing to implement, right? Because that's the other thing, is like you learn the techniques and then you go to implement, and so often you can get in your own way because you can be triggered by what she said, you can get annoyed at what she said, and your ego gets in the way because you get that need to feel vindicated somehow.
Yeah.
Or to set the record straight somehow.
Like,
and that will just, yeah, exactly. They need to be right. And so that can get in the way. But, since I did my job correctly, that client was able to go on and just change the whole situation.
Wow, that's a really impressive feat to listen for that long and then label it, and then they're able to implement it too, which is also the really important part, because even if they vent to you and they don't change anything, then they're in the same situation.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow. Okay, must be met. That's really cool. And then you said currently your partner, are you dating, or are you planning to get married soon, or what's the situation? Well, your current personal situation.
Yeah, so I've been with my current girlfriend for almost 5 years now. I mean, as far as I know, the plan is to, get married at some point and start a family.
Yeah.
We're not there yet. So we have a few years before we'll probably hit that mark. But yeah, I think 5 years in, we both feel pretty committed, confident. Yeah, I mean, we talk about it. So,
Okay. So it's in the plan in the future.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure. Yeah.
Cool. So I have a question that I'm pretty sure the audience will have is, so you're a guy who coaches people who are about to have a divorce, but you're also not married yet. And then you're also a younger looking guy. So I'm sure some of them are asking, like, what are the credentials, or what would qualify you to coach this situation?
Yeah, that's a really justified question, because, why would you want to work with me, right? Like, why would someone want to trust me with their conflict situation? And what I'll say to that is, number one, I have a track record for preventing breakups and preventing divorce.
Personally, to me, it sounds like you've already worked with a bunch of people and there's results. And for me, all I care about are results. So it looks like you're getting results. So on my books, you're like, you're good. But for everyone else, we can keep going.
Yeah. So thanks. Exactly. So I think the results are the most important thing. They speak for themselves. I think the second part to this is, I actually, being really straight up and honest. When you have two parents who don't listen to each other and who didn't know how to resolve conflict, it's very easy to repeat those kinds of patterns.
Yes, like generational
and
kind of.
Right.
Stuff. Yeah.
Right. Or just learned behavior, right? Like you imitate your parents a lot, because that's kind of that's how you see how to be in the world, right? And so that, having learned those patterns has definitely has made me come very close to breaking up with my girlfriend. So what I can say is, I think we've come close to breaking up twice in the 5 years that we've been together. And it was these techniques that actually saved me from the breakup. Because it's so, like, I have to practice what I preach, right?
Yeah.
And they only work if there's like a 100% committedness to staying together. And having actually gone through that, having come close to breakup, having seen how these techniques can literally turn a situation around very quickly, even if you've not been so diligent at using them in the first place, and gotten you to that point that's close to breakup, like they work, right? They work in life or death situations. Like, these techniques are not techniques I've made up. I've learned these. Yeah. I've kind of brought in a bunch of techniques together, and how do I put it? Like, synthesized a bunch of stuff together, and they're all usually techniques that come from life or death situations. So there's that. And I think the last piece I'd add to that is, my parents got divorced, and it has sucked since, right? It's just been, but like, between the drama, between like having to watch out of what shit gets thrown your way from one of your parents, it also is like very difficult in the sense of, like, you got to spend one life, one with one with the other. It's a real killer on your quality of life and on your stability, because you have to go to two different homes for just to see your parents, right? It's more planning, it's harder. So I have a real vested interest in and compassion when wanting to keep families together, more so than for the couples, but for their kids. Like, I'm doing it not so much for them. Well, I'm doing it for them, obviously, but I'm doing it even more for their kids, because they don't realize how bad it is or can be, for their kids. So
Okay, so what would you say to the comments, or the people in the comment sections of Instagram posts who are like essentially pro-divorce, and they're saying stuff like, "Oh, I'm so glad my parents split up or divorced, because it was a really toxic situation for me at home as a kid." Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah. So that's a very nuanced thing, and there are multiple levels of answers there. So I think the first face value answer is, it sounds like the person who said that was going through hell as a child, and that gave them relief. So
Okay.
so that's valid, and like that was obviously in that situation probably the best kind of band-aid situation on, okay, stopping conflict. But I think that, like, if we take it a step further, the next question is, why were these people fighting, right?
Yeah.
And so are they fighting because there's some emotional wounding, and there is, that one of the parents or both of the parents are kind of propagating negative behaviors or toxic kinds of behaviors? So then it's a question of emotional wounding. Does the person have a short temper? Are they stressed? Is their system kind of, and their physiology, is it not really very strong to be able to handle stress? And are they acting out? That's another question. And the third part to that is, like, what are they doing about it? Because most people in those situations, or who end up divorcing, they just get stuck in this cycle of arguing, and they constantly do the same thing expecting a different outcome, and never actually like take a step back and are like, whoa, like, what is happening here? Or even if they do that, because a lot of people do that and they still don't manage, and I'm not here to make anybody feel bad about themselves, but if they have stepped back, did they actually get at the root cause? And I think that's a really important thing to know, that like communication skills can prevent a breakup, because what they do is they basically increase compassion.
Okay.
So compassion being the understanding of suffering. When you understand someone's suffering, when there is understanding of suffering, that brings peace. It brings more love. It brings all these kinds of different things. So, and this is kind of why I say, like, I am what I said at the beginning, whereas like the night is darkest before dawn, and I'm the guide through the dawn. So because, just because I guide you away from the night, just because I guide you into the day, doesn't mean I guide you through the day. I help stop the divorce. I help stop the breakup. But then what happens after that? There needs to be some level of healing, some level of personal responsibility and accountability to heal the situation. So that's kind of how I look at it. And then I think the last thing, so that we had the face value answer, we had the question on why are people fighting, and I think the answer to that is, we resolve that with bringing in compassion, what I call applied compassion. So bringing in communication skills and showing people understanding is already the beginning of showing compassion, and then obviously taking that to the next level with more like what you do is kind of that next step. But then the last answer to that is, some people maybe got into their relationships for the wrong reasons.
Also true. Like,
and sometimes some people just are, maybe selfish reasons, or maybe they're just not kind of meant to be together. But I'm always a believer in, where there's a will, there's a way. And
me too. Yeah.
And that's also why, like, I never take on any client who has divorce in the back of his mind, like as a potential plan B.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting that's part of your vetting process, because if there's a plan B, then they're not going to give plan A 100.
Right. It's just not the. It doesn't guarantee a good result for the person, because they already have an escape-based mindset. So
yeah, I think that's something that personally, for my wife and I, like, both of us are like call them cradle Catholics. We were raised Catholic essentially since birth, so many of those ingrained in us, and we thought it over, and for personally, I drifted away from the church. I came back. For both of us, it's like divorce is not on the table at all. So it's
Right.
we can get really upset with each other, and granted, because I have better personal skills now, I don't. I'm better at maintaining the marriage at a good level. But yeah, both of us came in with the understanding like there's no divorce on the table. That's just the way it was. So I think that's a big factor. There's an interesting kind of during my research. There's an interesting statistic that came out. I think it was in 2019, where of the couples who got divorced, just let me know what you think about this, given your experience.
Yeah.
Of couples who got divorced, they broke it down by demographic, and the demographic with the least amount of divorce was actually Asians.
Really?
Yeah, I think it was like 13%. It was like really small compared to all the other ones. And I sat and I thought about that for a little bit, and I don't know if it's because like in Asian culture, it's very uncommon to have a fight in front of guests at all. And so like, for example, in the Catholic Church, if you have a fight with your spouse, you're supposed to solve it behind closed doors. And then same thing with Asian culture is the same thing, where it's like if a fight breaks out, let's say we're all having dinner as friends, and a fight between a couple breaks out, like between friends, it's like that means it's gone really bad already for it to happen in a public setting.
Yeah.
So I was wondering what your thoughts are on like if a married couple fighting behind closed doors versus like in front of kids, or because it sounds like in your situation it was in front of you a little bit because you had to mediate. Well, I was wondering what your thoughts are around that.
My only thoughts on that are what's the example that you're setting for the kids?
Okay.
Right. So ultimately, your kids imitate you in more ways than you realize.
Oh yeah, I'm learning that now.
Yeah. And I'm sure I will gain, more confirmation of this knowledge than I currently do. But I've seen it so much in myself. So I think the behind closed doors thing I think it's important. I think it's important to not be fake, right?
Okay.
And so like if things aren't well with your spouse, and you can't hold in the kind of lack of exuberance with them in front of other people, like I don't think that's wrong just because that's how you feel, right? But I do think that I definitely wouldn't ever suggest like fighting in front of other people, just because it brings in a level of shame that you didn't have before.
Fighting in front of other people?
When you fight.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. When you fight in front of other people, it's very easy for you and or your partner to feel ashamed of the fact that you kind of publicize this issue. I do believe in privacy and settling matters privately, absolutely. So I do think that like if you can handle things behind closed doors, that's better. Are you referring to like therapy now, or are you just referring to like friends and family, kids?
Oh, like let's say like not really like therapy. That wasn't the what I meant.
Oh, okay.
Like behind closed doors, like let's say for example, like hypothetically speaking, my wife did something while I was out or while we were out with friends that like really bothered me. It's not something where I would correct there. I would like wait till we were in the car on the way home where it's just us. So I'm not correcting in front of people, like that kind of deal.
Oh yeah, that's definitely way better.
And vice versa, should do the same for me.
Right. That's absolutely better than trying to correct it out in public. It's not the setting for it. People don't receive it well.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, actually, just thinking about that when you were talking about it now, my mind was, after I said it out loud, my mind was wandering out a little bit more. And also because you introduced that shame factor, I was thinking maybe the reason that it's beneficial to do that is because it forces you to pause because you literally cannot address it right then. You have to address it later. So there's like a literal pause between when it happened and then when you're going to address it. So that allows for like the respond versus react situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe that's what it is.
That's definitely part of it. Actually, this is really a question of timing, right?
Okay.
What's the right time to raise an issue? And it's something that I go through with my clients, right? So, public is definitely not a good time to raise an issue or try to sort something out, because of the pressure of like needing to keep face.
Yeah, and keep face.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's the timing elements of like what's going on in your lives, like having a really difficult conversation at the end of a long day or long week is probably not the best idea, right? So what I typically advise my clients to do is be like, look, pick a time where you guys are relaxed, where you're relaxed, where she's more likely to be relaxed, because what you're basically trying to do is you're trying to up the probability of the conversation going well, and timing is one of the variables in that equation. So that can be, there are certain times of the year where the timing is kind of off to have a conversation, like the holidays, or if you're staying with parents or something like that. That's one aspect. Then there's like monthly cadences. There's are you selling a lot at the end and you need to finish your sales quota at the end of the month, or there's lots of different variables in people's personal lives on when timing tends to be better.
Yeah.
But what I invite my clients to do is to really like look at all of the variables and decide, okay, when's the best time. The last thing I'll say to that is like the time that is the wrong time is when someone brings a problem to you. So
yeah, that's always the wrong time.
Yeah. So like if someone says, "Hey, I'm annoyed about something," and you're like, "Yeah, okay, that's fine. I get it. I'm sorry. Look, I really want to get this lesson out of this conversation before the conversation is kind of passed." That's like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense. That's a part of the thing where you see online where it's like when someone brings up something, adding on all these little issues.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really cool, man. That's just something I kind of always wondered, because a friend of mine brought me that stat, and I was like, I wonder why that would, for Asians anyway, like I wonder why that would be the case. But timing definitely is also an important factor. That personally is something like I just weigh and measure on my own, but I get that's a good nuanced variable to keep aware of, for sure. Would you say for conflict resolution, like what would be the top 6 fundamentals? Because I keep top 6 because generally for each sport there's like 6 fundamentals. If you get good at these fundamentals, you're gonna be good at the sport. Like what would you be your top 6 fundamentals for conflict resolution?
Oh, the top 6 fundamentals.
It doesn't have to be 6, but somewhere generally around 6 is where.
Sure.
Yeah, basketball's like dribbling, shooting, passing, like like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first element I'd say is tone of voice.
Oh, good one. That's not addressed very often.
It's the hardest one to control. So we can explore that more, but I'll say that because the tone of voice is huge, right? And so it's the highest leverage thing that you can use.
Okay.
The highest leverage element or technique or skill that you can use in a conflict situation. It's the highest leverage one. The next piece I'd say is self-restraint. So it's very easy to lose your cool
Okay.
when conflict arises. And if you can restrain yourself and be the one to do the listening before you do the talking or accusing or whatever it is you want to do, you may never even get to the fight.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Because
So
they feel cool, and then you're like, well, I don't need to respond to this, so
yeah,
gonna go about our day.
exactly.
Yeah.
So self-restraint or self-discipline. The third thing I'd say is active listening techniques. So these are like the formulaic expressions that you can use to and kind of strategy to start to disarm someone's emotional state.
Looks like, it seems like, feels like.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it feels like, because feeling is personal, but so that's not a word I typically advise my clients to use.
Okay.
But yeah, like what you're saying, it seems like, it sounds like,
Like,
it looks like, and then using, really being able to hone in and there's these techniques were really kind of explained well by Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. And it's what?
that's an excellent book. I highly recommend for anyone who has not ever read that book to read that book.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an incredible book.
Easy to read.
Yeah, it's a very fun read.
Yeah, it's like, oh, there's a hostage. How does he did he get him out?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But he calls it tactical empathy. Mm-hmm. And I think when it comes to, which makes absolute sense in the world of hostage negotiation and also business.
Oh yeah.
In the business world. Right. But I don't like that for a relationship. I don't like that kind of verbiage. I don't like the impulse it gives. Mm-hmm. Yeah, or even empathy, because again, I like to bring it back to compassion.
Okay.
Compassion being.
Oh, good. I was gonna say. Well,
Go ahead. No, you.
I was gonna ask, what's the difference? Yeah, for you, what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, so empathy is just the ability to see someone else's point of view.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Where in a conflict situation, you're beyond points of views. You're actually like struggling and suffering with something that the other person is doing.
Okay.
And so the compassion is literally the understanding of the suffering.
Okay.
Because that is critical. The compassion piece is critical for like the actual healing out of the situation.
Okay.
Because it's at some point when it comes to personal conflict, there's a level of broken trust. There's a level of emotional hurt. There's a level of frustration, anger, all these different very highly charged emotions that are usually, like in a business setting, it can like kind of build over time, but it's not as deep seated as a relationship issue. Like those emotions run really deep. And they often, as I was mentioning before, they can tug at trauma from the past.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So compassion is what is the kind of first. You got to kind of embody that living essence of compassion to initiate the healing process.
Okay. I think I'm following. And then I guess what would be the steps in the healing?
So we were going through the like 6 critical pieces. So again, starting off with tone of voice,
Okay.
practicing self-discipline, learning how to like real listening techniques, because people feel so much relief if just to start off with from their emotional pain if you've actively and accurately showed them that you understand their suffering, their struggle, or what it is they're upset about.
Okay.
So that's one. That's the first three. What else do you need to master? I'd say timing is a big one.
Timing, yeah.
Timing is number 4.
And matters if your timing is like, oh, we're traveling for the holidays and there's our flight's delayed. Hey, you know what about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then let's see, 5 and 6. What are 5 and 6?
If there's really 4, I mean, we could just keep it at 4. It doesn't have to be 6, but just generally speaking.
No, I think I'll add one more, and that is really understanding reciprocity. So one of the things I've seen in many couples is this kind of attitude to give up on giving when someone feels like they're not receiving.
Yeah, that I see that a lot.
And that kind of it's, I mean, you can call it petty, you can call it whatever you want, but ultimately it's a negative sum game, because you're basically like you're running a race to the first one who can give the least.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
So that attitude, it just means, okay, if she's not going to give me this, then I'm not going to give her that.
And then she's like, he's not doing that, so I'm going to take this away. And then eventually neither of you are doing anything.
Exactly. So, yeah, reciprocity is a huge component that is really missing in people who are close to divorce.
Yeah, because it also seems like they've been playing that game for a while too.
Yeah, it can be.
Possibly a game.
Yeah,
that's a good list to make sure that, well, to give yourself and your partner the best chance of getting out of that, for sure. That's very comprehensive.
Yeah.
Coming out from your background, one thing I did want to mention though was like something Ray Dalio had said was, you know, Ray Dalio is like the hedge fund manager guy. I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, I know Ray Dalio.
I read his book Principles, and what was interesting, and when you'd said when you're giving these testimonials of all of these men you've helped, one of the principles that Ray Dalio has is he doesn't take advice from anyone who has either, he doesn't take advice from, or in order for, sorry, I guess to phrase it this way. Have you read Principles before? Like, I might be preaching to the choir already.
I have, yeah, it's a great book.
Okay. But for those of you who haven't read Principles, because it's like 400 or 500 pages of text, essentially, Ray Dalio is a hedge fund manager, and I believe he got his hedge fund so big that where if he had traded in the market moved. I remember that him mentioning that somewhere in the book, which I thought was impressive, because I was like, at the time I was reading it, I was just finishing Forex trading. Like, I just kind of stopped, and I was like, that's an incredible amount of money, to where if you trade something, the whole market shifts price, because that's a big win. Yeah. Anyway, so Ray Dalio is this guy, and for him, everything is a system. So for him to take someone's advice, the person has to have either produced the result themselves 3 times and be able to explain the reasoning and how they did it, or they have had to have someone else produce the result, or coach someone else to produce the result 3 times and be able to explain it. And for you, Alex, like you've definitely done that, which is fantastic. Right. Like, and not only have you done it a couple of times, you can explain why and how. So I think that's incredible, and it's that's to be able to systemize your approach for a standard operating procedure essentially is takes a great level of awareness and skill. So I'd say good job, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thank you.
It's really incredible.
I appreciate that. Yeah, but I kind of want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to hear, how you got into this, how you work with clients, like what is it that you do? Because I only work with the crisis situation, like I prevent the divorce like right at that moment.
Yeah.
But then then the client is free to do something else. But it sounds like you kind of pick up where my work finishes.
Yeah, in a way, that was really interesting when we talked. We got really specific on who we're trying to help. I was like, that's cool because that's an area I don't touch. Usually at that point, it's like you need a specialist.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm going to start it straight to you. Actually, that's the way to do it.
Thanks, bud.
I guess the origin story. Yeah, the origin story essentially is before I was doing this work, I was a professional athlete. I did Taekwondo. Well, I've been doing Taekwondo since I was 4, and then I stopped when I was 29, and I'm 33 now. I essentially stopped just because I got really old.
Okay.
During that time, I was dating a girl, and the relationship was good at first, like most relationships are, because it's honeymoon phase, and then slowly, steadily went downhill. And during that time, I was trying to essentially approach it the way I would like Taekwondo. I was researching and going to classes and taking all this stuff online about like how to do it properly. And the relationship didn't end up working out. So I figured, maybe it was we're just not a good match or whatever. And then I met my current wife in the Philippines, and I was like, okay, cool. So I'm going to take all that knowledge. I'm going to add on even more knowledge, and then I'm going to be the best husband I can be. And it was essentially that the framework, the overarching framework of happy wife, happy life, where my wife's emotion and keeping my wife happy and solving her every whim on her whim was the way a lot of mainstream social media says to do. Mm-hmm. I did that, and not only was I unhappy in the marriage, she was also becoming stressed and unhappy because that's not like what she had asked for. It's not what she signed up for. That's just what I defaulted to because that's what I thought that everyone had wanted. And then I started researching and doing more stuff, and essentially I came across, I guess, more old school frameworks, not as modern. And it was essentially like, you need to be the man, you need to lead the relationship, and you need to be a good leader. So a lot of what I teach could be just generic good leadership advice, especially if like you're a boss leading a team, if you're a dad leading kids, or in my case, you're an instructor leading students, or if you're a husband leading a wife or your family. And I came across all of this from the research, but also because I guess that's how I stumbled into this niche. And then where I learned the skills for this was a little bit different. Growing up, I had a lot of social anxiety where I would, my life was fairly simple when I was in training because I just need to kick the other dude in the face and we don't need to talk and life is good because after that I go play video games. there's zero need to interact with someone socially, and if it didn't have to do with me winning in Taekwondo, I actually didn't really care to talk about it that much. I wasn't very social in school, and I had a lot of social anxiety. So like it was to a point where I had a hard time even ordering food from a cashier at like McDonald's. Wow. Like I would have to repeat phrases in my head over and over and over again, and like my palms would be sweaty like when I ordered. Like number one, no cameras. Wow. And if they couldn't hear me,
it sounds really hard.
Yeah, it was, and I knew that it was something I'd have to get over. And so I ended up taking a sales job. You may have heard of them. Like, have you heard of Cutco knives?
Yeah.
I fell for the pitch because like, man, you have an awesome background in Taekwondo. We'd love to have you in here, and you seem like a star candidate. And I was like, sweet, this is a great gig. And I'll never forget. So like we go through the training, and like they're like, okay, you're gonna have to talk to your client. And I was like, okay, if there's a script though, I can just read from the script, and I don't actually have to say that much. And then my first week of sales go by. My parents essentially the only people who bought from me. So I go into the next training with this sales training lady, and she's doing super well. And she's like, all right, Chris, well, we want to work on you to you're still here. We want to help you increase your sales, blah, blah, blah. So let's work on it. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And she's like, how much time do you spend building rapport with your customer? And I was like, what's rapport? And she was like, oh, when you ask them about your day and they respond and you tell them about your day. And then I was like, no joke, the question was like, people care about that? She was so taken aback. She's like, oh my God, Chris, yes, of course. And then she explained essentially her framework for selling was like, she tries to build as much rapport as possible, and then she'll do the presentation almost as if it's like, because she has to do the presentation, but I'm really here just to talk to you. Like that was her framework. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting way to do it. And so I did that, and I learned how to build rapport. I learned all these communication techniques that I thought everyone just had in their arsenal already. And so I built communication skills essentially from zero. And I've just been adding on different techniques and different ways to view situations, etc. And then now in my professional life, and as I've gotten a little bit older, like this last year or two, I've been around other men, and they'd ask offhanded questions about like, this is going on in my marriage. Like, what do you think would be going on? Or I'd see like the dynamic and how they're reacting and responding to each other. It's like, ooh, I don't know if that would have said that. Like in those situations. And so when those people, when those men ask me for advice, it's kind of just like, this is what I would do in that situation. And I just essentially remembered all the stuff that I had to learn later in life that were techniques. A lot of the stuff was from Chris Voss, some stuff I learned from sales, build comfortability. And then a part of it also is the stuff where you have to work on yourself as a man for what you were saying, the self-restraint, and like the tone of voice. That stuff I really had to work on, because that regardless of your partner is just stuff I think you as a man should have under control.
Right.
So that's a long story of how I got to where I am.
Yeah. So you said a bunch of stuff in there that I kind of want to tease out. So basically, it sounds like you really had this severe, almost crippling social anxiety. And the other day you mentioned, so you took a sales job. That's like the opposite of, that's like a social anxiety, person with social anxiety's worst nightmare.
Yeah. It's I took the sales job because, number one, it fit in the training schedule, because I was trained in college. I was training 3 times a day, and so it's like when I was trying to apply for jobs, no one's taking a guy who can work from 10 to 12:30 and then 4 to 6. Like no one's taking that dude, and I needed money. So there's that. And then the second part was, when I did take the job, I understood, I think just through Taekwondo, understanding that in order to grow, you're going to have to throw yourself in situations. Like that's just how life is, I think. And so I took the sales job knowing that it was going to push me, and worst comes to worst, I would make 0 sales. But I got to talk to people.
Right.
This was the upside.
That's awesome. That's like a real life growth mindset. Like,
thanks. From that book, The Thinking Body, Dancing Mind.
Nice. Yeah. No, but that's super cool that you willingly put yourself in a very uncomfortable situation to get out of this, to overcome the social anxiety. And so basically, but then once you did that, it sounds like because so much of just conversation was completely foreign to you, you automatically assumed that everybody else already knew this.
Yeah. Like, oh, big time. I'd be going around and like, especially because in high school and like in college, everyone still has like their cliques, and conversation moves so fast, and they know how to respond and make everyone like laugh and stuff. And I was like, felt like left behind, essentially. Like I don't have a good framework or tool set to handle this. And I mean, I had like a couple of friends in high school, but I really didn't talk that much. It was really just like I ate my lunch, out my training like later in the day, and that was it. But yeah. To answer your question, I knew that it was going to have to be addressed at some point, and better to do that. The sooner I could deal with the situation I knew was going to be bad, the better. The less it would compile, I guess. Almost like the emotional baggage you're talking about, where like if you don't address it, it just builds up until they have to have a 3-hour session.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that all makes sense. And so you learned a ton, and then you learned so much that you kind of overshot what most people actually
I think.
know on average.
Yeah.
So that when it came time to, be in a relationship, you already had this. You already had this like personal culture of studying how to make it the best it can possibly be, and it failed you on your first relationship, and on your second relationship, basically, you you did the same process, but you're like, okay, I need to try something new because it didn't work the first time around. And then because that knowledge set is so much higher, people started asking you for help because you know all this stuff, like you really studied it deeply.
Yeah. I actually don't know what prompts people to ask, but for some reason they'll all offhandedly ask, and a few married guys had requested it, and I just thought it was just stuff that everyone knew. Like I literally just assumed everyone knew all of this stuff. So that's a very accurate way of putting it. Is like I did overstudy to try and almost like to overcompensate where I thought everyone was. So I learned a lot of stuff, and the missing component essentially for the marriage, at least my experience of it and what I see faults in other guys, is essentially like hating the man in the relationship, like value systems, who you are as a person, and the whole, like, the marriage shouldn't be catered around your wife's emotions. But my wife has actually like mentioned to me like she's really glad it doesn't, because if it is around her emotion only, then like she's not allowed to get upset because then it means the marriage is bad, or she's not allowed to have a bad day because that means the marriage is bad. And so retaining the frame of, or I guess the framework of like being the man and knowing what I teach my guys is, I guess, to break down more of my process, even though there's a lot of communication on the back end of the communication. I find it doesn't work as much if you as a guy aren't building yourself, or have not like if you yourself aren't doing things that make you respect yourself. I don't know if that makes sense. So I think
Absolutely.
if you should be like working out, you should be studying, you should be trying to provide for your family, like all of this stuff kind of goes into that. And I look at it as that's the vehicle of the car. The more of that stuff you have, the more sturdy the car is, the safer your wife feels being in the car with you. Because if you're missing one of those components, then she knows, and like, let's say you're not working out, like she knows and like this is going to come bite us down the road, like later down the road. And so if you're doing all the things that help keep yourself as a man intact, then your car is sturdy. But if you're just sitting in a car going nowhere, that also gets boring for both of you. And one of you is going to want out of the car after a while. So if the other part is to plot a destination for where you see your ideal marriage, where you see your ideal life, and then make sure that that's aligned with your wife. And if it's not, then you can hash out like the small details.
Sure.
And as long as and part of the security for your wife is to know that you're taking action every day to push the gas a little bit to get closer and closer to the destination. And once
that's awesome.
Thank you. And I found once that framework is in place, all the communication skills also that you learn on the back end of that help keep the conversation in the car a lot better as you go toward your dream vacation. Ideal life in 10 years to be is.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good analogy. The car analogy is really good, and that makes a lot of sense around everything that you've just said makes a ton of sense. So how in like a short statement, like how do you in a couple sentences, like how do you frame what it is that you help men achieve?
The question hasn't been posed like that before. Essentially, what I help men achieve is I help them take a marriage that they think, let's say your ideal marriage is a 10 out of 10. That's like perfect, everything's in line. I think with my frameworks, etc., I can take a marriage that's around maybe 3 or 4. So not, if it's a 2 or 1, man, I gotta call you. 2 or 1, I gotta call you. I'd take a marriage, I think that's essentially average, and I bring it to around an 8 or a 9. 10 out of 10, I think, is like when you hit your ideal state, you have so much money you don't know what to do with, fighting, you're giving back to community. Like all that stuff is 9 or 10, but I believe I can get people to around 8. And the reason I'm able to do that, number one, is because part of the curriculum or part of what I teach is I try and keep these guys accountable. So where they're constantly building areas of fitness, their relationship, and in their finances. And then on the back end of that, I'm making sure that they're maintaining the marriage well, because like a fit body, like your marriage also takes maintenance. And there's some of it which you went over was the compassion part, helping your spouse feel heard. And this is a really long answer. I guess
no, it's true.
Yeah, the one statement would be essentially that I take guys who are around a 4 in their marriage, around average, and I can take it to about 8. The 9 and 10 is really stuff that you got to push on your own. That's pushing your own boundaries and your own personal growth at the very top for your like actualized state. But I can take an average and make it pretty fucking good.
Gotcha. So so this actually hits on another question that has been posed to me and was also a kind of a state of kind of like caused some insecurity in me, is like people think that the work I do is like a marriage coach, like I help people improve their marriage, but I don't do that. What I do is I help people save relationships and prevent divorce. So people think that on this spectrum from 0 to 10, I can take them all the way from 0 to 10. And I can't. I just can take them from 0 to 2 or 3, like what you were saying. And now what I thought was that you could actually go from 2 or 3, right, all the way up to 10. So, but it sounds like what you're saying is that last piece, that 9 to 10, right? It sounds like that's like almost like a different skill set.
It might be. Okay.
So what I was going to say is like, what do you think is needed then, or how can a coach help someone get from an 8 to a 10 or from a 9 to a 10?
Oh, well, sorry, I think I overlooked one of my own like pre-frameworks. So I think in my mind, a 10 is actually almost not attainable. That's perfection already. Like, does that make sense? And so whenever I'm near a goal, I move the goal.
Okay.
So I guess that's the underlying premise. That's why I say I can take it to about 8, because when you get to 8 or around 8 or 9, I've learned that you should take your goal and move it, because if you hit the goal, then you tend to like slack.
Dip.
And in order to keep yourself pushing and on the grind mode so you don't lose all the progress you've made, if you continuously move the goal back, you essentially gaslight yourself.
That's actually a really important point, because like when you said like I only take people to an 8, I was like, oh, okay, so why wouldn't you just take people to 10? Yeah. But what you're saying is actually like on a scale of 0 to 10, right? You actually help people go from 2 to 11, 12, 13, 14, and just like break their barriers each time. Like you're like, there is no 10. There's just, let's go all the way up to 100 on a scale of 1 to 10, right?
Yeah, in a sense. It's you ascend as high. I think in life you ascend as high as you want to go. So I think that for the most part, like my overarching framework for life is as you become stronger physically and mentally, like you have better relationships, and then your relationships or in stronger physically, mentally, your money and your relationships get better, and all of that kind of feeds into each other. Like as you have more money, you can have better vacations, you can meet better people, which may help with more business, or better vacation means I get to work on a beach now instead of inside of a gym in my garage. Like it's constantly, there's always an upward spiral to life. I think if you're constantly trying to improve, there's always ways to improve. So yeah, to your point, 10, what may have been a 10 now for you is probably not what a 10 was for you 5-10 years ago. And so that 10's always moving. I think there's almost always a way to improve the system. And so even though I have frameworks and systems and stuff like that, like there's always ways to improve skill sets.
Yeah.
So, as an example, I'll just give an example. So, for example, one of
Yeah.
them is like appreciation. So, to make your wife want to what your wife needs, essentially, generally speaking, is heard and safe in a relationship. And so, one of the ways you can make her feel seen is by telling her appreciation. And so, like a base level is like, oh, thanks for doing the groceries, and then the next level on top of that is thanks for doing the groceries and picking out the stuff all the kids really like, because that's really means a lot. That it's really nice that you look out for the family in that way. And so, like, it's like a little bit deeper. You can improve
Right.
skill set by being more specific in your praise means more to the person. So being more
That's awesome.
yeah, it's stuff like that for your spouse or stuff like that. You can even do that for a coworker. It's like telling a coworker or someone who works for you, like, great job on that report versus good job on the report. I really liked how you color coded where we're in the red and where we're in the green, because that makes it a lot easier. That means a lot more than like good job on the report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's actually something really interesting and something I never thought of. So you're also teaching me stuff. Like, that's awesome. That's really cool. But yeah, thanks for explaining that, because I think that's an important nuance. The scale thing and going from 2 to 10 or 2 to 8, right? I think when you shared that, that really makes a big difference to the whole message that you're giving off, because nobody likes to be told, I can only get you to 8, but you're gonna have to go to 10 by yourself.
That's
but
true, yeah.
When you say, like, I actually help people actually like expand their horizons beyond 10, that's way more compelling and actually makes a lot more sense with what you do.
It was good for you to call that out, because, like, in my own head, like, that's just the way the math works. It's like when you hit to 8, right, the goal moves, and then now you're back at a 6, so you have to push to 8, and then you move it back again.
Yeah.
So, thanks for calling.
Yeah, no.
I didn't specify that either.
Yeah, no worries. I just, for the viewers and for the people listening, like, I wanted them to know, like, no, you can just keep working with people and, like, help keep improving their relationship. Like,
always room to grow.
Always what?
Oh, there's always room to grow, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what, like, do you want to share some of, like, what your framework is, or do you want to share some of, like, how do you help people achieve that? Yeah, because
so generally, I think moving forward, I tried to do a group session of it, but I found that in the group session, people don't really go as deep because there's other guys on the call, and sometimes we're just running out of time. And so, one of the more effective ones is we're doing a one-on-ones call, and then the call is generally from an hour and a half. Then from the hour and a half, I listen to where there are issues in the relationship. So, like, where conflicts had occurred, kind of in your situation. I give suggestions or tools that would help aid them in the future, for example. So, a lot of it is the tactical empathy, but a lot of it I found, just as you're saying, is that self-restraint is a big factor, and the ability to. Oh, I actually wanted to expound on that when you had mentioned it, but then the conversation had slightly shifted. One of the things I'm having my guys do is, like, if they get caught in a situation where they're not sure how they're coming across, is to imagine, like, take a second and imagine yourself looking at yourself from behind the person's shoulder you're talking to. So I'm talking to my wife. Imagine me standing behind my wife, looking at me, hearing what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound angry or look angry, or does it sound calm and like you're curious? Not calm or curious. What would that look like? And then just take that and use that now. That's what you should be.
Right.
That's how you should be saying.
Absolutely.
There's other minor stuff too, where it's a lot of it in a way is conflict resolution, but I also try and remind the people to. Even Covey has this relationship ratio of, like, 1 to 5. Remember that? Or I'm sure you probably read it.
No.
Oh,
no, I haven't.
Okay. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I actually hadn't read the whole book, but then I'd heard about this from a marriage therapist this ratio from a marriage therapist, and I told this other guy about it who was asking me questions, and he was like, "Oh, that's from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits," and I was like, "Oh, I probably should read that book at some point." My brother's read it like 5 times. He was like, "Dude, you got to read this." I was like, "I read the table of contents, and I think I got it." But essentially, the marriage ratio is you want, for every 1 bad interaction, you want at least 5 good interactions. If it's below that, then the marriage, what this guy was saying, is the marriage generally on the rocks. And then if it's above that, then you're in a pretty good spot. 1 to 7, I think, was the average for good. And then like thriving, super good marriages are like 1 to 12. And ways to improve that ratio. Well, what people would ask, like, what connotates a bad interaction versus a good interaction? Being an accountant by trade, anything that's neutral I count as like nothing. And then if it's a bad interaction, if my wife walks away frustrated with any kind of negative emotion, like frustrated or stressed or whatever, that would be a bad interaction. And then good interactions are any time where there's like praise, or I make her feel happy or laugh or etc. So ways to improve that are what I mentioned earlier, like appreciation, and then essentially like labeling her emotions is another big one. So it makes her feel heard. So that way she feels understood when she's walking away, versus like, he just doesn't get me because then. And so it's one of the initial activities is essentially take an audit of your marriage. Like take a week and every day write down, like take a tally of how many good versus how many bad did I do. If it's not where you want it to be, then you have to find more things to praise your wife about, essentially, or talk to your wife in a positive way about, so that way you can boost them.
This is free coaching, guys. Like, I'm learning from this already.
I'm a numbers guy, and I was like, there has to be some way to quantify good versus bad. Like it can't just be.
That's like, really good.
Feels good. Like, that's not a good gauge, because it could be a crappy situation for your wife, but you feel good.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down. That's awesome. That's really good.
Thank you. It's stuff that if we implement with your guys too, as they're going through the healing process. It's like, this is the quota you're trying to hit. Like,
yeah. This is definitely going to enrich my my services too. Not that I want to go into marriage coaching. I don't feel like that's something I can do with authority yet. Also, there's an element to where like kids get involved, and that's something I just know nothing of yet. And
kids is,
but
oh, go ahead.
But the whole like the whole like preventing the breakup, that's been fine.
Hold on that, man. I learned a lot from you, like, in your session. I got some good notes here, and I was like, this is
I'm glad.
Really good. I do a little bit with kids too, but kids and maintaining your relationships all around has generally the same framework from what I've seen.
Sure.
So essentially the same tool set, whether or not you're with kids. The only nuance with kids is it's a little bit more age dependent than it is with your spouse, because I mean, once you're an adult, you can't really talk to a 5-year-old the same way you talk to an adult. So I also give a few, just from martial arts instructor background, the stuff that I had learned that helped kids listen or to be more connected to them, help influence them to become a better martial artist. Those are kind of stuff I drop in and sprinkle in in case they need it. Some guys need that.
That's awesome. Well, when I'm married, I know where I'm going.
Thanks, man. And if people come to me with a dire situation, I know exactly where to point them.
Yeah, same. No, I actually think I might know some people who I can kind of send your way.
Okay. Sounds good.
So, yeah. But so back on the whole, like, yeah, no, but you asked me the question of, like, what are the top 6 things?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. What would yours be?
That's a good question. I think of
so this would be the top 6 things that men need to move themselves up the relationship scale.
Okay. I would say the first one is actually not having to do so much with the relationship, but I would say the first one is you need to know your values as a man and where you're headed. That's important also, is because I think have that, then you're in. I haven't been working on yourself, you're in a broken car, and if you don't have a destination, then your car's not going anywhere. And it's only a matter of time before one.
That makes sense.
So, yeah, values as a man and where you're going. The second thing I would say is, much like you, I'd say practicing self-restraint and tone of voice is very big. And that's something I personally had to learn because
Yeah.
do you know Jordan Peterson?
Yep.
Yeah. Peterson has this Big 5 personality test. And I'm taking this test, and my score is actually 0. I scored 0 both. I took it twice just to double check, and my compassion score is actually 0.
Wow.
I had understood, like my I don't know if this even really matters, but I remember hearing compassion was like the ability for you to stand in someone else's shoes and see the situation from their perspective, I think. Or maybe it's not. Maybe I think
that's more empathy, right?
Maybe empathy, yeah. I think in your definition that means more like empathy. And so because I'd raised my whole life, I essentially I was fighting my whole life. And so a lot of situations that I think some people would see as stressful, I would just be like, that's
normal.
Yeah, that's solve it. I don't know. And so even though I'd learned the communication skills, like this is what to say in the situation, it came off wrong because my tone wasn't there, and your tone is more than your words. Like I think words are like 10% of communication versus tonality is like 30 or 40. And so,
40, yeah.
Yeah, mastering tonality was essentially something I had to like learn. Something I'm still trying to be conscious of, because especially if stuff is like very stressful, sometimes I'll say something and then I'll apologize later because it's like, but my tone in that wasn't very nice, and I apologize, and I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to say it like that. I was just trying to convey that we need to get all the kids in the car soon, not like angrily. So every now and then every now and then there's still faults. So I'm still not batting 100, but I know the know-how to navigate. So that'd be number 2 is tonality. Number 3 would be understanding that. I think this is where like people got super pissed at me, but I think understanding that when your wife is talking to you, she's trying to build connection more so than like relaying information to you. Because as guys, we're just problem solvers.
Right.
We'll hear part of the day and it's like, oh, and this went wrong. And then we'd be like, well, get off the freeway next time. It's like, doesn't probably want to hear that when she's telling you about her day. She's just trying to connect with you. And learning the tool sets around how to connect with your wife better, I think would be great.
Yeah.
Expressing appreciation for the things that are done. Probably the 4th one. That's a big one because that allows her to feel seen. So her efforts in the relationship are seen and appreciated. And I think that helps prevent what you were saying, where some people are in that game of removing giving. And who can remove or give fastest is a winner. And so showing appreciation for when they do give, I think helps as a fail-safe against that.
It's like the antidote.
Yeah. I don't know. It makes me laugh because some people like on Instagram get so pissed where it wouldn't use the word like helping. It's like, it's not helping.
In what context?
So it would be like household stuff. It's like, I'd say like, oh, that's really cool. I'd say something like, like, oh, when I'm done working, I help my wife with the kids. And then people are like, you're not helping your wife with the kids because that's your job. And I was like, what?
Some people have nothing better to do.
I know, it's nuts. I had double checked, and I was like, I think if someone who was working for me still owed me a report and sent me the report, I would be like, I'm not thanking you because that's your job. Like, that's just ridiculous. I'd thank you for the report. Like, Thanks for. Thanks for
Yeah.
People online are nuts.
No, they really are. I mean, some
so
people.
Crazy.
Yeah, it's like they really just assume the worst so that they can like pick at it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much like as what you just said, like words are only 7% of what's being said, 7 to 10%, and then the tone of voice is close to 40,
and then body language
right?
is the other 60, right?
Yeah. So it's like you're just people don't realize that they read with the text with their own inner voice.
Yeah.
And it's literally like their own voice that they are reading it with rather than actually reading it with your tone of voice. So it's like really more a reflection of themselves rather than...
It's stuff I have to like remind myself, and I'm still learning too.
Yeah.
It's crazy space.
Yeah.
Shoot. So that was, go back to the list.
Number 5. No, that was 4. Express appreciation was 4.
Okay. I would say number 5 is having. I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Having good, because it's important to have regular like date nights, because it's very tempting to get caught in the 9 to 5 stuff. And like, I know if I was by myself, like I don't need to go out and have dates. I'll just keep working. I'm more than happy to keep working, but I'm like 99.99% sure my wife wants to go on dates every now and then. So having regular date nights, and then I guess the key point for date night is just trying to do something you've never done or go somewhere you've never gone, because going to new places together builds bonds. Going to new experience builds bonds. And so every now and then it's nice to like go to the same restaurant, order the same thing, but only go to that restaurant and order the same thing after like the 4th time you're going there. Like, dude, can we do something else? So a way to do that is like, when was the last time you had learned something new with your wife? When was the last time you went somewhere new with your wife? That helps. The new experience helps build bonds.
Gotcha.
And then I think for in a workplace environment, that's just like a good, like the team building days. I think maybe, I don't know how people feel about them. This is stuff where it's like, personally, I don't care for it, but I can see why there's merit to it for other people. Because I'm more than happy to just sit at the desk and do work, but other people really like the outside bonding stuff.
Right. Some people just don't want to work either.
There's also that.
So just on that, before we get to number 6, if you have one, so do you, when you're with your clients, do you work with them to like create like ideas for dates and things that could be good for their relationship?
Yeah. One of the things we check in every week is essentially, when's the next time you're going to go on a date with your wife? That's like on the goal to-do list, is scheduling a date. Just to make sure it's always...
That's awesome.
It's always happening, because I don't know, I think it's really easy to fall off, and especially if... it's just really easy to fall off. It's just like, oh, I've been working so hard, and then things get busy, and then if it's not put on your calendar before other things, suddenly your weekend calendar is full of other social stuff you have to do instead of connecting with your spouse.
So do you, because this is something that I'd heard from another friend. He's an entrepreneur. He's a lot more established than where I'm at. And he said he has a cadence of, he's got like a weekly check-in night where he like does a check-in with his wife.
Yeah.
Then he's got a weekly date night, which is separate from the check-in. And then he's got a weekly sex night. It's like the only thing that, like, the only goal of that night is to achieve to like have intimacy. And I don't know if like it's sex 100% of the time and it's like intimacy in other ways other times, but yeah, how do you like, what's your take on that? Like, how do you
Recently, we've started to implement the weekly check-in nights because I've heard those were a good idea. Just to, it's a way for your wife to feel heard also, because then she can. It's having that separate than the date is a good idea, and it's something I've recently implemented. So it's not something like I teach or have super into the curriculum yet. But the weekly check-in night is there's strategies for how to make that fun, so it's not like a team meeting, because no one really likes to go to a team meeting in corporate settings.
Yeah, how to make it fun.
Yeah, there's tips for how to do that, where essentially you go over the logistics, but then you also go over the things that you really appreciated them doing. In case you forgot to mention to your spouse that you really appreciated them picking up your coffee, that's a good time to bring up, hey, thanks for getting the coffee that I really That's another bump into that marriage relationship too. So that's generally I think it's a good thing. A lot of families practice that, and then it's a good way to set up goals. And I think it doesn't affect me as much yet because we don't have kids who are older with other errands to do yet. But as you get older, I can imagine if there's only 2 drivers and now there's 4 destinations because you have a destination and your spouse, and then your 2 kids each have destinations. Coordinating the logistics is probably on the front end.
Yeah.
Intimacy wise, that's something I don't really touch on, and I leave that per couple, just because.
Okay.
Maybe partially it's just a Catholic background, and I'm like hesitant to touch that subject. I think it's overall ideas on that are it's important to the marriage, should happen fairly often, and I heard this from someone else, but it was essentially like kind of weird for me to say on air for the first time because it's something I believe in my head, but I've never actually said out loud.
Yeah.
And it's like if your spouse isn't asking you for the next time it's going to happen, you need to find a way to perform better in bed.
Okay.
I'd heard that from another coach, and I was like, okay, I'm going to keep that in mind. I don't know how I'm going to say that yet, but that's.
Well, that you just said it.
I just said it, so that's something I also keep in mind as well.
Yeah, no, that makes absolute sense. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the whole intimacy thing is a really interesting one, and I think that, I think there's a lot of guys who want to improve. Yeah, their sexual intimacy with their wives. So that it doesn't seem like that should be an area where you shy away from.
Yeah, I think personally it's because I have frameworks in my head that I don't say out loud specifically because it's on the subject of intimacy. Not comfortable yet. I'm not confident. Well, I'm uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm not confident. I'm uncomfortable presenting that side yet, just because in Catholicism it's like a little taboo, I guess, and especially with the Philippine background, that's also very taboo to speak about. So it's something I'm trying to overcome that stuff to better help them.
You're kind of basically start breaking your own mental barriers there.
Yeah. If it gets to that, like if people need help in that area, I have frameworks or gauges to where it's like if it's not like one of them I just told you, if she's not asking you for it, then probably look into resources or something. I don't know. But I guess to elaborate, since we're on air about it, he essentially said like the experience for a woman is like 10 times greater than that of a guy's, and so if it's amazing for you, it's supposed to be like 10 times more amazing for them, and you crave it, so you have to make it in a way where it's like where they also would want it. And ways to do that via number one is, I think the number one complaint is like emotional intimacy throughout the day. Stuff like making them feel heard, or like doing stuff where you hug them at random points in the day, so it's not like 0 to 100 right when you guys both lay down. No, that stuff's kind of been going on throughout the day. But yeah, I haven't really focused too much on that yet, just because, like you said, I'm getting through the mental barriers of it.
Yeah. No, and they're hard, especially when you come from, it sounds like Catholicism has really given you not only spiritual strength, but a framework from which to view your life. And it doesn't sound like you kind of want to. And there's a sanctity to that framework, right? So you don't want to defile it in any way. It sounds like.
I think it might just be like, because I would say overall in general, the church doesn't talk about the intimacy part that much. It's not very elaborated on. And I think I don't know why, I tend not to question why that often. I just look at how is it applicable in my life, and that's the end of it. That's the end of where I look. But yeah, I think that I know that the weight of the Catholic upbringing plus the because Philippines is like 90% Catholic, so it's
very Catholic
country. Yeah. That one also is. I'm just trying to get over those to help with that part of it.
Yeah. Oh, so it sounds like there might be family watching your stuff who might.
Yeah, and I know that part of my audience is also like guys who used to watch me from Taekwondo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and since I haven't moved the audience over yet, like, and I did start a whole new channel. The guys were just like, dude, just start putting fatherhood content on there.
Right.
That's part of why I don't go into it that much, but I think I'll want to coaching if I'm ever asked about it. Like I have decent frameworks, or at least gauges. So
that makes sense. That does make sense. You want to maybe once you're what? Sorry.
I'll keep it like PG or like kid friendly, a little bit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And so regular date nights and check-in nights, and then the last. Do you have a sixth thing?
I almost think if you have those 5, you're in a pretty good spot, because if you know who you are and where you're going, and you're constantly improving that self-restraint, or wherever tone of voice when you're speaking.
Those are the principles.
Yeah, I think those are the main ones. I guess because that goes under number 1. So I think we're good. I think that's pretty much the top ones would be those.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah, so I guess one question, like, can we pause for a sec? Like,
yeah.
How are you feeling? How are you?
I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah.
You good?
I'm still like unsure even about the whole. Even now, just mentally, I'm just like, I'm not sure if I should put that intimacy stuff in there. The intimacy stuff. But I think eventually it's important for a marriage, and I think that's actually a big selling point I've noticed with a lot of coaches. Like, do you want to have more sex with your wife? Join my program.
Yeah. I was about to say that as well. Like, sex sells, you know.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and like,
unfortunately,
I think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Well, not that kind of selling.
That's true.
But intimacy is a really, really big piece, and actually, that's one of the things that one of my friends who was telling me that he's kind of stuck around basically like a 3 or 4. Sex is one of his things with his wife that he wants to improve. So, it's not.
Oh, I don't.
It's not.
Well,
sorry, let me just.
Oh yeah. Go ahead.
I was gonna say it's not. Like it's not skeevy, or it's not. I guess wrong to talk about it if you're actually helping someone with a problem.
Yeah, I can see that makes sense. I have to reframe it in my head like that. Help someone.
Yeah. I've had to do some of that with some of the marketing stuff that I do and whatnot.
Okay. One thing I was gonna say was was for intimacy, try and ensure you're coming at it from a place of giving instead of a place of receiving. Guy.
Yeah.
Some guys are like needy. It's like, no, I need to like get off. We're supposed to feel connected, and you're just using me to jerk off, essentially.
Right.
Versus if you're giving and you're like want to be connected, then it's coming from a different place, and I think your spouse feels that.
Absolutely. Yeah, they definitely do. How do you, so let me ask you this for your viewers. How do you reconnect? Because like what you're basically alluding to is the fact there that the physical intimacy has to have the basis of an emotional intimacy of some kind. It has to be like a true connection rather than just a mere erotic release. Or like a urgeful release. So how if someone's in a relationship, like how do they reconnect if they've maybe lost that connection?
Number one is to so point number one is like have your values as a man and be on your way to your destination. I think a lot of people lose the sexual intimacy part because if you're not the man in your relationship, you default to being the son of your wife.
Damn.
I heard that from someone else, so that's not an original. I wish that was an original, but I was like, that's a good quote.
It's still great. I mean, it's still a mind-blowing quote.
Yeah, and I think that's what went wrong in my first relationship, and then I was trying to implement that same framework, which essentially I think is what Will Smith. He ended up slapping Chris Rock while they're separated, so it's definitely not a good model. I say that because I really followed Will and was on board with like his vengeance story of like I'm successful because this girl cheated on me when I was 16, and I was like, yeah, be successful. And then I was like, oh, he's reading all these books. That makes sense because if I sucked at marketing, I'd read all these books. And then he did all that, and then that ended up going downhill. And I was like, okay, so that's definitely not the answer. And then in my own relationship, I had also seen that. And what essentially happened was in my marriage, I had become the son, and I was asking her for direction, like, what do you want me to do? And it's not like you take away all the dictating power from her wife. Like, she still weighs in on me and stuff. But the final, it's like she's CFO to a CEO. Like, she's telling you where things are at, and then you're still the CEO with a vision. Like, this is where we're going. And so
when you say, what do you want me to do? Like, in what context?
Almost like if you go down, like a very simple one is like when you go downstairs and like the house is a mess and the kids are screaming. Like that's speaking of your timing part. That's not a good time to say, what do you want me to do? It's like, well, you can help console one of the screaming kids. You can pick up stuff. You can help with dinner. Like there's so many things you could do without having to ask your wife, what do you want me to do in the situation? That's a really basic one.
Okay.
Oh, I was going to say point number 6. This one just dawned on me because this is something I'm still trying to build also. Is having a brotherhood of other men around you is important. Because that one, sorry to like sidetrack this again.
No, that's fine. It's really important and something I totally agree with.
Well, for me, it's important because even though your wife and, well, social media says just be 100% vulnerable with your wife, blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, if it's important to have that emotional vulnerability every now and then to let her know where you're at. But you can't, if you are too emotional, then what happens is she feels like she has to solve your emotional situation. Does that make sense? And so that's another thing for her to do versus like, I'm a man and like, this is currently how I'm feeling, but this is my plan of attack for how to fix it. Like, that's very different than like, I'm just sad, and like 4 days in a row you're just sad and you're in bed. Well, it's like now you're sad and in bed, and now we don't have food because you haven't been working. Like that's but if you are feeling sad and you are depressed, the people you bring that to is your brotherhood. Trust, who wants you to be better, who can also call the situation as you see it. Like essentially it'd be like your friends who can see the situation outside the frame for you.
That's awesome.
I think that'd be point number 6, is to have the brotherhood of people you can rely on and ask for help when you are in the picture. Whereas Stan Locke says you can't read the label if you're in the jar. Like that's.
Yeah, that makes sense. Can't read the label if you're in the jar. I like that.
Stan Locke one. Then to go back to the other point, I guess, for the intimacy.
Yeah.
You default to being the boy, and so I think even before the relationship part is number 1 is make sure that you're actually being a man who does self-respecting things. Like make sure you're working out, make sure you're building yourself. That kind of framework first, And if you have that, then you can start building. Then it's easier to build the emotional. Because
Gotcha.
if you're doing that and you're essentially self-validated because you're a guy and you're earning your own respect, like I'm doing these things, then when you're building emotional connection, it's not like I need your validation from this. It's just like I'm connecting with you, I'm letting you know how you feel versus like I need you to make me feel okay.
Right.
Hopefully that's making sense. But what's your take on it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't coach people through that.
Oh, okay. Well,
right. I just like at this point, at the point where they're like close to breakup, there is definitely no sexual intimacy or emotional intimacy. Like it's bad. Or even if they do have sex, it's very unfulfilling, and
like
they kind of walk away. Yeah, they kind of don't feel connected. They don't feel like it was, fulfilling beyond just the kind of physical nature of it. Yeah.
Like I had a good adjective for as you're saying it, but then I forgot. It's all good.
Yeah. I'm just going to try this pause feature for a second. But yeah, having a brotherhood, that makes total sense. And so how would you... So one of the things that I think a lot of guys feel right now is I think a lot of guys don't have a brotherhood.
That's part of why I started what I'm doing right now, because I felt throughout fatherhood, I felt even though my dad is cool, I'm cool with my dad, but it's like I felt alone. Is part of why I'm doing what I do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And so like you basically are offering a brotherhood, right? Like that's what you're doing. You have a group of guys and you help them through their stuff, and you guys, it sounds like there's some kind of collaborative nature to this. Like you guys will throw ideas around to each other, like what works, what doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm trying to build it. I want more people like in the community, or get more people in the community, which I'm figuring out how to build, because I think community building is its own skill set. So I'm learning,
very much.
I'm learning how to do that. There's a couple guys in there right now, and things are going well. We're able to get good ideas off of each other. Like two of the guys just had their kids. Like one of them had their kid last week, and the other one had their kid like a week ago. And so
nice.
Me and like the other dad who's in there, we're able to spitball ideas for like make sure your go bag is ready. Week 36, even though they say it's going to give birth on week 40, week 36 could come any day. So have your bag ready at week 36, and different ways of just like weird nuance stuff, like how best ways to put a baby to sleep. How do you coordinate who's staying up at night for the kid? Like that, all these tips and tricks and whatnot.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really great. Sounds like you're probably helping a lot of guys like that too.
A couple, and I want to help more, which is why I'm learning marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Aren't we all?
Yeah. But what about you though? Do you have a brotherhood like that you're building, or that you have a community, or?
Actually, it's funny you say that. It's not something that I have. Ever since, and it's something I've realized over the last few years is something that's really missing from my life. I was the kid in high school who was like, had a lot of different friend groups, but like wasn't like stuck to one friend group. And so I was like almost the opposite of you. I was like a social butterfly in high school. Like, I was also like the student body president. Like everybody knew me. Yeah. So like I was in high school, like I was
like prom king.
No, I wasn't prom king.
Okay. I was just curious.
But I was very active and kind of pretty known in school. And then after that, I went to university and I just became a number, right? Because I went to like a really big university, and then which was like very different because I went to a pretty small high school comparatively. There were only like 100 people in my grade, so
okay.
yeah, everybody knew each other, and the relationships were kind of deeper. And even if you didn't know, because like obviously not everybody knew each other, but everybody at least knew of each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and then I got really ill. And, while I was at university, so I never really managed to make like really solid friendships at university that, with other guys, just because like while everybody was out partying, I couldn't go. Right. So, it was just like even being social, like I couldn't do it at that time. Now I'm fine. But like at the time I wasn't able to. So I'm now in my late 20s, and I don't have this kind of group of guys or friend group that I can kind of fall back on and be like, hey, like, what's up? I have a friend from, elementary school that I still talk with, but I don't have like a group or community setting. And that's something I'm definitely looking for. So, yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. That's where I found myself also. And I was like, this is, seems like it's an issue.
Yeah, right. At what point did you find that? So it sounds like you kind of relate to that story a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't have a friend group, and part of what actually prompted me to go find a community and where I learned about this brotherhood thing was, I remember the saying that's like, you're the average of the 5 people you hang out with the most.
Yeah.
And I was like, if I want to become super wealthy, I have to go find people who
yeah.
And so that's essentially what started the quest. And then they're like, do you watch like Fresh and Fit or whatever?
No. What's that?
Fresh and Fit's like a red pill. It's like I would say it's more of an entertainment show. It's in the red pill manosphere kind of thing.
Okay.
And they essentially just bring people on. They bring on girls who are not always the best representation of women, and then they have arguments with them about what's right or what's not right in society. But one of the like on the back end of their entertainment show, these guys are like have decent financial tips. They'll sometimes bring someone on who's like a real estate mogul or whatever, and like pick his brain on the show about like what's the best way to invest in real estate. Like one of those guys, I haven't joined it, but there's for example, one of the guys has a paid community that you can join. Like, so there's stuff like that where like I joined like 2 or 3 of those kind of stuff just to meet other people, and from there, I found some guys who were like cool to talk to, and then there's other guys like in life, like however, it's just like there's guys probably I'll never talk to this dude again.
Right.
Yeah, but there are what's it called? But there's groups like that, so where it's like a paid networking event essentially. You can join to meet other people who are like that, and every now and then you meet a guy who's just a social climber weirdo, and you're just obviously not friends with that dude. But then every now and then you meet another guy who's pretty chill.
Yeah,
I have a couple of those guys, and then what I'm learning now and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to build kind of community aspect for guys, because I understand that especially in our culture now, it's people are left out. Like a lot, I think especially guys are left out. There's not that many resources.
Yeah, especially guys and dudes who are maybe more conservative or more traditional in a certain sense.
Yeah,
the mainstream doesn't really
narrative.
Yeah, it doesn't.
I heard what was interesting was just really quick, there's a couple I know, one of them's from like the Midwest, and she was like, church here is weird, like you guys go to church and then everyone just goes home. Like for my life, that's all we did. We went to church and we went home right after. We didn't stay and talk. But she's like, apparently in the Midwest there's actual like community, like people stay around after like church and they talk, and like the guys talk, and there's times where all the guys will go to church for a night and all the wives have stay at home with the kids, and then there's vice versa. So another day all the wives go. And so like I think churches maybe in the Midwest are a little bit better at building this community aspect versus like over here, everyone's like, I got dinner, see ya.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense too. Even in the Catholic Church?
Even in the Catholic Church, yeah. Wow. I haven't felt big sense of community. I've met guys who are in the Catholic Church, but not necessarily like from that physical church community where I've like built awesome friendships with them. But not necessarily like I met this dude at church and now we're like the best of friends. Like I don't think that's
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha. It's funny because I actually was raised Catholic, but I never really connected. I struggled connecting to the church for various reasons that I don't really necessarily want to go into right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know where I was going with this. But oh yeah, it's funny because even when we did go to some churches growing up, like community wasn't necessarily there as well, and I didn't know if that was a Catholic church thing or if that was just like other churches were the same. So
Hey, like from my understanding, it's from here on the West Coast that we don't do.
where are you based?
So I'm from Sacramento, California. I grew up in the Bay Area, and then you're on the East Coast, right?
Yeah, I'm in New York State. I'm just outside of New York City.
Okay. So I guess it's the same over there. Maybe it's only the Midwest who's got it right. Who knows?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't go to church here. The only place I go to church is in Italy. My grandmother comes from a small town in the mountains.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, that's the place I'll always go to church, precisely because of that community element. I get to see all the townspeople, and they get to see me. And I mean, I pray and stuff. I'm spiritual outside of that, but I just don't. I don't feel connected to actually going to mass on Sundays. It's more for the community element.
There was a time where I was I kind of fell away from the Catholic Church and I became Christian for a little bit. And Christian churches, I think, is like 99% community. It's pretty interesting going to their masses.
It must be nice. Is it nice?
Yeah. You go over there and then like you're welcomed right away, and they can tell if you're new because they can see like they have people who are assigned to greet you, and then have you sit next to people and like introduce, and afterwards there's all these other like different activities. They do a really good job facilitating community, I'd say. So yeah, that was interesting. Was an interesting year.
So, and you obviously can decline to answer this, but what made you try a Christian church, and then what made you want to go back to the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I can answer this. Even though it's kind of like off topic, so I don't know. We can probably cut this section out if it's not.
Yeah, I can pause it. I can pause it if you want.
We can have it just in case. I don't know, or you can just cut and.
Yeah,
it's easy to Control X delete on the editor, so easy.
Yeah,
So what had happened was 2016. Well, leading up to around 2016, I was like falling more and more away from the church. I wasn't too big on it. And I was like, everyone goes. I don't see the point of going. Like, the use of my time going to the Catholic Church, in my opinion, saying like I guess I don't mean like disrespect, but in a way, like rote prayers. Like this is just stuff they've been saying for thousands of years, like the Our Father and all that. Like, I don't see the value add to my life.
Right.
And then the 5-10 minute homily that the priest gives is like sometimes they're not a good orator, and so I get zero value from that.
Right.
There's the idea of the sacraments, which I'm still trying to like wrap my head around in the Catholic Church. But besides that, I was like, I don't see the value add. Like, I guess, long story short, I don't see the value add to my life to going to mass on Sundays. And then I had tried to, especially because there's no community element, like you're saying, there's no value. Apparently, there's no value add. So after that, I went to. I tried for the Rio 2016 Olympic spot, but I lost to the London 2012 Olympian in sudden death. And that was like the culmination of everything I've been trying to work for like my whole life. So after that, I entered like a 6-month depression, essentially. And like I wasn't sure what I was doing. My brother came through with this book called Purpose Driven Life. You may have heard of it.
I've heard of it. Yeah.
Yeah, written by like Pastor Rick Warren. And then he was like, I know you're feeling pretty bad, but Michael Phelps, the swimmer, was in a depression, and then he read this book and he stopped being in depression. So, and in my head, I was like, well, if it's good enough for Phelps, good enough for me. So, so I ended up reading the book, and it was about like just essentially what your design is, you're designed for here being on Earth, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I was like, okay, well, I think part of what I'm missing right now is community. So I need to go find a church that's like this. And so I spent like a month or two trying to find one of the churches. Eventually found one of the churches, the exact same church that like Pastor Rick Warren does, but it's like a satellite site out in the Philippines.
Okay.
And then I ended up going there for a year. I met actually, was it a year? I think. Maybe it wasn't a full year, but it was like close to a year.
Sure.
I met good people over there, and then my wife, and decided that we wanted to. For me, the wedding was essentially whatever my wife wanted because I didn't care, and I'm sure as a little girl, like maybe this isn't all women, but a majority of women probably have their wedding day planned in their head of what it's going to look like.
Sure. Yeah.
that's safe to say. And so, in my opinion, I was like, I just want to show up, and whatever you want to happen, as long as you show up, I'm good with whatever. Like, I don't care if it's 500 guests or it's 50. It doesn't matter to me. And then I had done that, and we'd done kind of like deeper marriage prep. So before you get married in the Catholic Church, there's like supposed to be like a 6-month training with a priest, and it's kind of like a like once a month check-in, like make sure you answer these questions, and some of them are pretty good questions. Like what would you say the good traits and the bad traits of your own parents raising you were, and what kind of stuff would you like to pass on to your kids, like kind of stuff like that, where it's like, oh, it's kind of reflective, this is good. There's also a lot of questions like, do you want pets in the house or no pets in the house? Like that's probably stuff you should agree on before you get married.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So one of the requirements of this Catholic Church marriage is go to a 3-day, like essentially like marriage boot camp where they teach you about the sacrament of marriage and all the other stuff, that beliefs, and you go on. And there was a couple there who was older. I don't want to guess their age because I don't want. And the dynamic was one that I've never seen before. Like the guy was very strong, very strong, very sure of himself, and he's giving good marriage advice. And I remember I was sitting there, and his wife was just like nodding along, and she said her section. He's in the middle of his speech, and she reaches up at one point and just like barely touches him on the elbow, and he immediately stopped and was like, what is it, sweetie? And then she part, and I was like, and it's weird because I don't know the exact physical characteristics that dictate these two people being really in love still. Mm-hmm. But I saw that, and I was like, whatever that is at that age, I still want that between me and my wife at this age. Like, you know, like that's the aspirations, to be like, feel like them. At their age, because a lot of times, a lot of people had resented. One of their spouses had passed away, and they had remarried, so this is like their second marriage essentially, because way. So until death do us part. But these guys were still together, and so we asked them. I was like, "Do you guys do like deeper marriage prep, or like do you guys teach classes, or teach how to do what you guys have, essentially?" Like, actually, we do. A lot of people have asked us this question. So we took an additional, more like outside of I guess the direct thing you have to do as a requirement. We ended up doing 6 more months with them. And essentially it was once a week, and they have readings picked out by different popes or different people of the church who had written essays essentially about marriage, and then there's some Bible passages, and it was essentially like, you read this, you summarize it, you think about what it means to you, and then we're going to hop on a call, we'll answer questions and explain the meanings of what these mean, like what they're trying to say here, if you have questions, or the deeper meaning, or the lesson you're supposed to do. That way you can have a strong marriage. And we ended up doing that with them. And after reading, I guess, more advanced readings that you don't have to read it's not like required, because on Sunday you just hear the two readings plus the gospel, and then there's a homily, and then the rest of it's like sacrament of the Eucharist. But it was the first time that I'd read readings outside of what's required in the church, like the essays by the popes, et cetera, and a lot of it had just made logical sense to me. And so for me, that was like, okay, well, I'm more on board with what, now that I understand more of this perspective of marriage, I'm more on board with like the Roman Catholic way of viewing it. And so
Gotcha.
That's what got me in.
That makes sense. So at this point, when you started this marriage course, because I didn't understand how you went from that Christian church to doing the Catholic marriage
prep
thing. Yeah.
I met my wife, and so we were like not sure which way, because I was like, Christianity is cool, because I mean, when the guy talks Christianity, it's like 1 hour of how I can apply gospel or Old Testament, New Testament into my life. So it's like 1 hour value add. Plus, there's the community. So this is awesome. I think a lot of things, and I try and think of things in time.
No, it makes sense.
But she wasn't sure about that, and I don't know if she was really open. I actually don't remember if she was like open to switching, but she knows she wanted.
Oh, she was Catholic and she wanted it.
I think that might have been what it was. And then I was like, all right, well, I know my mom would want me to get Catholic married, and to me, whichever church married, if I get married and it's civil, like I'm just happy to
be married.
Yeah. Which now in the Western world, apparently with all the stats, is like apparently not a good idea. That's essentially why I switched, was to help my wife's view of the wedding become true. And then I was like, oh, well, this stuff is actually pretty interesting. So
cool.
That was a really long-winded, but appreciate you listening.
Yeah, no, of course. No, it's really interesting. And actually, it's something that I've noticed in the clients that I have, and as actually a part of the vetting process is, they don't need to be Catholic, they don't even need to be Christian, but they do need to have a strong spiritual component or connection of some kind, because I find that people who have that component, and who are active on that, have a strong value system. And that is part and parcel to the integrity of wanting to keep the marriage together.
Yeah. I find that true also. And I think almost the reason it's important to have the religion or spiritual factor in your point is because it forces the person to answer to a quote higher than what they feel.
Yeah.
That's the big one. And that's also, it helps a lot with helping your wife feel safe, is if you have that spiritual component, or the code of values that's higher than yourself, helps definitely with your spouse. Like, at least I know what the exact aim is, because this is the aim of what, no matter how he's feeling, he's going to stay beholden to the value.
Right.
An extra layer of safety. But that's
interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say the same thing. That's interesting that you've seen it in that way, that it's an added, dimension or variable to the whole safety factor.
I learned that during the marriage prep, because I was like, I asked the guy the same thing. I have to look up my notes, but I remember one of them was, if you're church going, then it helps reassure your wife that you answer to a code, someone higher than yourself, and so you're pulled into the code versus like how I'm feeling. So if I'm feeling right now like I want to go smash that person down at the bar, then it's like, well, that's not part of the higher moral code, so you shouldn't do that. Versus,
right?
No, I'm gonna make myself happy, so I'm gonna go down there and talk to that chick.
Gotcha.
So that one's not a Chris original, but that was a good little tip.
What were you? You were also gonna say something was interesting that I shared.
I was saying that's interesting. It's part of your vetting process, because your ability or your filter for selecting clients is very, very precise, and I think that's very good, because you're able to help a very specific person with a very specific need, and it's something I don't have in my my system yet, I guess, is vetting good clients versus bad clients. As far as I can tell, I think part of my vetting system, it seems like the people who value the system a little bit more are those with kids on the way or those with kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's that may be part of the vetting process in the future, but it's something I've noticed so far. But it's, for me, it was interesting because you have that as part of the vetting process.
Yeah. I mean, and so if this gets published, any religion is welcome. It's not.
Oh yeah.
I don't discriminate. I don't discriminate on the religion. I don't discriminate on the on belief system or anything. But I've just noticed that like people who have a strong spiritual connection of some kind are very principle driven and also have the better results at the end of the day. That's what it's all about. And it's about how well I can secure, how confidently I can
deliver expected result.
Yeah. And part of that is, in this kind of coaching scenario, a lot of it is dependent on the other person. Because you're not the one actually doing the work. It's not a done for you service, it's a done with you service. So the other person has to uphold their end of the bargain there. And but people who have strong principles tend to be really, really good in that regard. What was I going to say? I can't remember what I was going to say. You mentioned something about the vetting process. Yeah, it'll come back to me.
Okay. If it comes back, just feel free to share.
Yeah.
So I guess, people just, maybe I'll ask you this at a different time because I think it's more of a question on the business versus in the business question. So that's I'll ask you that at another time. More of like a marketing thing, because I was like, this is for me. It's like very curious. It's really, I'd say it's really interesting and inspirational for me to see that like you've got this much figured out already on who you're helping.
Well, I'm glad, because I feel like, kind of when you're starting out, you don't have that kind of level of confidence that you feel like you can even inspire someone. So I'm glad that what I've shared has been of value to you
of
as
great
well.
Value. I think it's a fantastic value, and I think, Alex, you got a lot of really good know-how on how to solve problems, and like a lot of it's exactly as you said. A lot of people leave university without these skills, and like this is stuff that even I have to help people or coworkers or just random conflicts where it's just like how do you have this?
Yeah.
And so the stuff you went into and your ability to go as specific as you do with the nuances and apply it is fantastic. Because
thanks, man, I appreciate that.
For guys like me who are learning and very analytical sided, it's like we need all of those little bits and pieces and nuances explicitly said, because besides that we went at it. It's like you didn't tell me to do that.
Right.
It's like make me feel heard. How? Like what am I doing physically with my face?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is there any other stuff you wanted to go into?
No, I can't remember what I wanted to share just now. But yeah, like I think what you do is really awesome. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Because I feel like we can talk about like working on your business rather than working in your business, and that might not be part of the
the podcast.
Yeah,
it's a little different subject. Did cover a lot of ground already too, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Does part of your work, because part of my work involves helping the guy become a better man. Do you find part of your work do that as well, or do you work with both people at the same time, or is it more like, how is that dynamic between? Because I help specifically guys. because
Yeah.
I only know that side of the equation. That's the only side I've studied just because of but do you help both the guy and the woman in your situation, or do you mostly just help the dude, or what's the?
Yeah, so I've worked with both men and women for conflict stuff,
Okay.
for like saving relationships on the brink of breakup. I am going to narrow down into working only with guys
Okay.
because I find that it's I just find it more rewarding. Personally, I do have a free community where anyone can join, and I have men and women in there who are learning these techniques, who are solving their relationship stuff. But so I here's like my take on it is I believe so strongly in these frameworks and these techniques that I also don't think they should be gate kept. So that's why I'm putting them up for free for people at my own cost, right? Because I'm not monetizing that space. But I am going to I'm specializing now in like guys who come who are trying to prevent a divorce, and I only need to work with one of the couple. The techniques are powerful to the point where that's all. You only need to work with one person to improve the marriage. Like what you're saying, what I've noticed is that it does take both people. They both need to take responsibility for themselves and decide that they themselves want to level up. But it's not. But I don't do that as part of my service. And I'd add that absolutely, like I do help men improve themselves because they are learning these skills. But it's less of a general, like broad improvement in many areas of life, and it's like a very acute. Okay, you need to learn these skills right now to solve this problem. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Very specific person and very specific for a very specific thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted, I guess, as a point of a clarification, in case you're pitching to other guys, would essentially be like for the stuff that I do, I mainly also focus on communication, and then the physical and all that other, like your physicality, mentality, all that other stuff is like it's covered kind of generally, but not as specific as like communication. Generally, when I'm talking to guys or I'm helping on one-on-one, it's like a what transpired in the situation specifically, and then next time the situation occurs, this is the kind of technique to use. I think maybe essentially similar to what you're doing, but not with as much. They're not at zero, so it's like this happens every now and then, kind of thing.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. I do think it's really cool how there is almost like what we do is like there's so much continuity from what I do to what you do, because it sounds like a lot of the communication skills are very similar.
Yeah.
And you just kind of, if I'm like the tip of the iceberg, you're everything underneath. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's like almost complementary. I view it as almost like complementary skill sets. Like if you the stuff I teach is essentially like safeguards, and if you fall past the safeguards, then they need the skills you have to like get back to where you're just running the maintenance.
Exactly.
Like, yeah.
Exactly. Because actually, one of my clients that I had, he was close. He was receiving divorce threats. He felt like he was close to divorce, and he had the weekly check-in. He had the weekly date night. He had that process in place.
Okay.
The problem was that his wife basically wasn't. She came with a lot of issues, and she wasn't able to self-reflect and see that what issues she was bringing to the table. And the process that I taught him, these communication skills, it got her to see what what her traumas were and how they were acting out and causing conflict in the relationship. So so sometimes you can have this maintenance process in place, but that doesn't mean that you are, safe from the threat of a breakup or of a divorce.
Especially if the other party doesn't, or like in this case, like isn't able to reflect or see where they have to improve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was a really wild experience, because this client, like almost a year and a half of divorce threats, being like, the fights a couple times a week. I'm going to divorce you. I'm going to take away the kids. I'm going to take the kids, blah, 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 all this stuff. And then to have his testimonial, like when he sent me a voice note back, he was like, our conversation was an absolute revelation. She apologized for the first time for how she was behaving. And actually, she said, I should probably go get some therapy, because like I didn't realize I was being like this, but I see how much like I'm being a problem, and all these kinds of stuff. And it was just a mind-blowing result to because these techniques, they do force contemplation, but to have them lead someone to self-contemplate that deeply to where they apologize. Because the other thing is, like, this woman was like behaving like a narcissist, and most people think that narcissism is this like static thing.
Yeah.
But her reaction, her response to the techniques that I taught him and everything that, we went through, flew in the face of narcissism. They don't apologize. They don't take responsibility. They don't say like, I think I should go get therapy. I didn't realize,
Yeah.
They don't have those kinds of self-realizations. So it was really just an incredible result.
Sounds like it. Yeah. I'm kind of curious now. Like, I don't know if you want to share this out loud or not, but like, can you give an example of like what you told him to say in response to something that she would say that maybe forced her to contemplate? If you don't care to share that,
well,
but
no. I mean, we went through basically the listening framework that we've discussed already. What I helped him do was I helped him actually create like custom phrases that worked for his situation, for the stuff that she would say to him. And I also helped design some questions to lead them out of that pattern.
you have an example of like one of the questions?
So I think
this is really cool.
Yeah, so like one of the questions that I asked him was, I mean, I think one of the questions that I have people ask is like a blanket, and that you can then dive down deeper into like a specific thing for that situation, is like, how did we get to divorce being our only option?
Oh, okay.
Because that's like a slap in the face on your perspective without slapping you in the face with it.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
It's like, whoa. I'm like treating it as if it's the only option when obviously it's not. Or another thing, this one client, they were running a company together. Him and his wife were running a company together, and it was technically her company, but she was helping him strategize, and I mean, he was helping her strategize and like develop the company. And she didn't like the direction it was going, and so she just wanted to file for bankruptcy on the company without like any discussion as to the ramifications of what bankruptcy entails, what it does to your credit, et cetera, all these other things. And so one of the questions I had him ask was, how did we get to bankruptcy being our only option? Or what are we trying to achieve by declaring bankruptcy?
Yeah.
Because sometimes they think that that decision, whether it's divorce, whether it's bankruptcy, whether it's that thing that they feel squeezed to do, sometimes they think that that's the only option. And it's like, if you really think of, and really when people choose an option, it's because they're trying to solve for a situation.
Yeah.
But sometimes if you just take a step back and you look at the criteria of that situation, you realize that what you've picked might not be the best solution for those criteria. So it was like just that kind of thing. But really, she had a lot of built up resentment, she would blame him for a bunch of stuff, blame him for making her do things that he didn't want to do. And I've actually made a YouTube video about this, saying something similar, where she would blame him for making her do things when he was basically just giving his opinion on what he thought they should do, on what he thought the best outcome was. And because he was a bit more experienced on the things he was weighing in on, they'd usually go for that. And then she'd blame him, say, I never wanted to do this. You made me do it. And then it even went like he was like going crazy because he obviously never meant for that to happen. So he actually wrote up a piece of paper that said, it's basically like an affidavit, and it said, I hereby declare that I am making this decision of my own will, and I'm not being coerced to do it. And then, so she signed it, and then 6 months later, she said, you made me sign a piece of paper. So, well, that's where the whole disarming, defusing, pulling out the emotions that have been swept under the rug is way more important than trying to solve the problem logically, which is what he was doing. He was like, sign the paper,
good. It's on paper. I can submit this later. Yeah.
Yeah, you're good. Then you recognize that you're doing it by your own will, and I'm not making you. So if you recognize this, then you can't use this against me. Use it against him, right? It's just, once you start operating in the emotional world, it totally changes the game.
It's a different kind of game to be played.
Yeah.
That's how did we that's an interesting question, because I'm currently studying NLP right now. Are you familiar with neuro-linguistic programming?
I know of it.
I'm studying it a little bit more so because I like how it's going into how to reframe your thoughts. And so I believe I can help my guys reframe their thoughts, and it's easier for them to handle certain situations. So that's why I'm studying it.
Oh yeah.
And one of the questions is when someone gets angry, when you are feeling the feeling of anger for a situation that happens or maybe recurring, one of the questions that is suggested to ask yourself is, how do I know to be angry in this situation? If I move some of the variables around, is it different? Like, let's say I'm getting angry. So-and-so is asking me to get super pissed. It's like, well, how do I know to be angry in this situation? Like, if my friend had asked me, would I also be pissed? Or what's actually going on? It forces you to think about what's actually going on, and gives you a second to pause so you can respond instead of react. Yeah. So when you get posed that question also, I was like, oh, that's also pretty interesting, that instead of just asking yourself, you can ask your spouse if necessary, and then let them reflect, how did we get to divorce?
Yeah.
That's a good, I guess they'd call it a pattern interrupt is a...
Yeah. Is it?
Maybe, because it kind of, in a way, it stops this, because if they've been operating in a certain back and forth pattern, I guess, asking how to and putting the number one, it's different, but number two, it puts the thought on them for how did we get here? It's pause for a second and think.
Yeah, I guess it could be a pattern interrupt. Yeah.
I'm not super versed. I just remember reading that So barely knew reading. Yeah. Well,
Cool, man.
Well, that about wraps it up. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. I personally learned a lot of stuff. I have pages full of notes from this, and it was wonderful to get to know you, Alex. Thank you for sharing not only your knowledge, but also your expertise and experience with the group. Because it's one thing definitely to read it from a book and to gather it that way, or to read it from a blog, etc. But to hear it from someone who's actually helped other people execute on this crisis situation and help them solve it has been phenomenal. And I've personally learned a lot. So thank you again for the time. I know we kind of went long, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. Yeah, thanks so much to you as well. I learned a ton from you as well. I'm not a father yet, but I will be. Or at least I plan to be. And so I've learned a lot from you on the other side of the coin of the whole relationships thing. Actually taking your relationship and reaching new heights with it. You really know your stuff, and it sounds like you've also had to implement it in your own life, and that's what gives you this whole credibility and authority and ability to help people make changes in their own life. So it's really awesome that you're doing this. It's noble, you're keeping families together, and I really wish you a ton of success in this. And thanks again for chatting with me for the last almost 3 hours.
Likewise, Alice. Thank you very much.